welcome to Other Lands Editing Podcast, where two speculative fiction writers and editors help you craft fantastical worlds by keeping an eye on exacting editing and foundational writing principles. Every 2 weeks, we bring you interviews with other writers, advice on editing and writers' craft pitfalls, and reviews of popular media to help you grow. So sit back, relax, and join Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss as we discuss all things writing and editing. Hi, this is Margaret Bates, and I'm coming to you with Midnight Voss for the next installment of the Other Lands Editing Podcast. And while we had and still did take notes at AwesomeCon, we'll probably talk about that eventually because so much had come up in the past week about the Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a reboot series, and then its cancellation and a lot of other stuff. And we kept finding ourselves talking about it to each other. We wanted to do an episode about our feelings on that and some of what it says about modern storytelling, and especially modern storytelling with what's allowed or not on television and our feelings on all of that. So say hi, Midnight.
Hello.
So I guess first, Midnight pointing this out is because it's such an old series and because it's one that a lot of people have a lot of different history with how they got into it and what it means to them, that might be something to give context for us is how we got into it as well. So I guess I'm going to ask Midnight, how did you first discover Buffy and when did you first start watching it?
Technically speaking, I first started watching it, I think 2004, 2005, when a friend slash roommate had me watch Tabula Rasa and Once More with Feeling, which is a terrible place to start if you know Buffy, because it's season six. For starters, I don't know who these characters are, and in Tabula Rasa, they don't know who they are either. So it was entertaining and funny, but I didn't really fully watch it until like a year or so later after I'd gotten through my first semester of grad school, and I'd been seeing reruns on regular TV, and I wanted to actually watch the show, so I bought the box set and I just pounded the whole thing. So I think it's different for me because I wasn't growing up with it. It's not like I was watching it as it was happening. I could have. I just was in a conservative household and I don't think we had all the channels we could have. So I didn't see, I graduated in 1999 like Buffy, so I could have been on the group with that, but it was more that I was watching it afterwards and attaching to it in a way of seeing all this really character-driven writing with women in the front of it at a time when I was maturing a little bit late socially. So I think it was visibility in a way that I hadn't really had before with television shows because I wasn't a big TV watcher to that point.
Yeah, I guess my story is really different, although I will say I came in a way that was almost as bad as coming in with Tabula Rasa or Once More with Feeling. I came in on Becoming Part Two. So I was going through the channels and we had the WB and I was like, oh, I've heard a lot about this Buffy show. Okay. And I turned it on and I'm like, I don't know much about this show, but I thought she liked her vampire boyfriend, Angel. Why did she send him to hell? So then I watched that one episode. I was like, well, that was weird. For those who don't know, Becoming Part Two is the second part of the second season's finale. A lot of things happen, including Buffy having to kill Angel by sending him to hell for reasons. So it's a really confusing place to go to start the series with. So I didn't really understand. I was like, okay, that happened. And then I was at, of all things, a lock-in at my church. And one of the girls was a big Buffy fan, and she explained to me what the heck was going on in context. So then when the show came back, I started watching it around one of the first or second episodes of season three. And I was like, oh, I like Seth Green. I like Oz. He's a werewolf. This is cool. So I kept watching it for that. And then I basically watched it all the way through week to week. I wasn't super online with it, but I was super into watching it week to week from the beginning of season three until it ended in 2003. So that was something I did grow up with, and I'm a little bit younger than Midnight. So I first started watching it, I think I was in eighth grade when they were in their senior year of high school. So it was a little bit of a disparate. So I was like, oh, this is what high school will be like, which is not true, obviously. Not even the supernatural part, just the what high school's like part. But I was a little bit younger than the Scoobies are canonically. So it's a little bit of an age gap. But yeah, I grew up watching it. I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. Started for Oz and just really enjoying like a werewolf. And then I kind of got into staying for, I'll be honest with you, Spike. But I also just really fell in love with the writing of it and all the things it was trying to say. And then I also got into sort of the scholarly side of Buffy because they had a journal for a long time run by a professor at East Tennessee State University, can't remember which one, called Slayage, which is like a whole journal of Buffy studies, and they actually had academic conferences. So I
Yeah,
took
I
a
went to a conference with
class.
a it was I don't remember what the paper was about, but the title was something like Fluffy Bunnies and Wanna Blessed Bees, and it had to do with appropriation witchcraft and
Yeah.
Willow's like transfer into like legitimate earthy like witchiness. So yeah, it was a big academic thing in addition to being something people could just watch and attach to.
Yeah, and I actually took a class my sophomore year of college. It wasn't at Duke, but I could take classes if I wanted to at UNC, and they have a big media studies and journalism public policy department. And one of the professors was teaching Buffy, but in a way of talking about sort of perceptions of social support during times of crisis and using that as the framework to discuss that theory. So I took that class and then wrote a couple of different articles to present at the Slayage conference and a couple of deep dives into episodes for the Slayage, like online encyclopedia of episodes. I did one for Fool for Love and I did one for Beneath You because I said I'm a Spike person. So I had a lot of relationship to it, both as an academic and as someone who just really loved the story and fell in love with how hard Buffy has to keep trying to keep things going. So it was
Yeah,
something that was very formative for me as both a writer and someone who was into paranormal things to begin with and like playing with language. And for a long time, things I wrote were very Buffy speak-esque in the dialogue. And sometimes I still have that creep in for good or ill. But it's also just really formative to me about what a show could do because, you know, if you grew up in the 90s, it was the beginning of television where there were these kind of myth arcs or these long ongoing stories in the writing, especially like paranormal dramas weren't really a thing. They just didn't exist. And then, you know, the X-Files caught on it, started having very myth-heavy episodes again with its Monster of the Week, and Buffy, like 3 years later, really ran with that as well. And so that was really the start of this is where you could go with having an overarching mythology and especially monsters as metaphor and a lot of things that were formative to me as a writer and for me as a feminist and for all of Buffy's as a show's limitation from 30 years ago, run by a man who is beyond problematic and awful and Joss Whedon and it being very, very white, feminist centered, it still had a
yeah,
lot of things that were different for the time and had women in the lead of a show and had this idea that she could be a strong woman. She was like a superhero in her own right. And that was something you didn't get to see. You might have seen it on syndicated television because by that time Xena existed, but it wasn't something you
yeah,
saw in primetime television up in front every week either until her.
yeah.
And so in the last year, I was excited, if trepidatious, because Disney owns Fox now, and Fox originally made Buffy. So Disney and Hulu were developing a sort of a continuation, a requel of the show, I guess, where it was going to be called Buffy New Sunnydale, and Buffy, would be in there as a capacity of a mentor to a new Slayer, and there'd be a sort of a new set of kids and Scoobies in Sunnydale, and it would be this mixture of her popping in every so often, recurringly to be a Giles or a mentor or watcher to the new Slayer, and really getting into the new Slayers antic and seeing how the world had expanded and where the Scoobies had gone since then, and all that kind of stuff. And so they I think first teased it like a year ago, and they were developing it with Sarah Michelle Gellar's blessing and her doing it and being one of the producers on it and working with it with Chloe Zhao, who's an Oscar-winning director for Nomadland and who had also been nominated, although she didn't win this year for Hamnet, but Jessie Buckley, whom she directed in the lead actress role in that, did win an Oscar for her performance. And then
Yeah, and they had the writing team from Poker Face as well.
yeah, the Zuckerman sisters. So it was a very acclaimed set because you got an Oscar-winning director. You've got people who are already well praised for the dialogue and like the critical acclaim of Poker Face. Some of the original producing team, like Gail Berman, and in a sort of a silent capacity, Dolly Parton, work back to the producing side of it. So it's like a big female team of people who were real standouts in their particular fields working on it. So it sounded exciting that they were getting to do that and craft it their way, especially outside the shadow of Joss Whedon, who's a racist and misogynist and mistreated his female cast and might have done worse, according to the allegations Michelle Trachtenberg sort of alluded to later in life, but back to when she's 15 and how supposedly he couldn't be left alone on set with her. So fill in those blanks as you will. So I was really excited to see what a group of women who were really invested in the project and in the legacy of Buffy could do with that without his shackles on it, or just having to have the cast this time go through a lot of the torment and being pitted against each other and the psychological drama of like the way Whedon ran his shows, which was to basically abuse everybody because he could get away with it.
Yeah, and I like the concept as well. I mean, I was pretty much down for any Buffy reboot. I was down for the cartoon where they were going to redo the whole thing as what if Dawn was there in between the actual season one things. I was down for the one where it was a different Slayer and she was just like out there doing stuff. Those fell through because you didn't have the kind of support. But for this one in particular, it's just so fascinating the concept of Buffy finally gets to be the Giles is that she is on the other side of this, where this has been her entire life. She's settled now. She gets to have a paycheck and a life, but then the world is falling apart again, as it is, because we're all in our 40s or 50s, if you're thinking the Gen Xers, and everything's falling apart again, and it's us and the Gen Z, and what do we do? So it really would speak to something to have these people to look up to in these stories and get to tell the stories and just be real with it. But apparently we don't get to have that.
Yeah, the unfortunate part of the story is it was taking a while because I knew they had shot presentation pilot, but upfronts for the studios comes up in May, even though we're not really on a linear TV model anymore. But a lot of their advertising and we're going to do this, and here's our big plan for the year comes out in May. So I was like, well, it's about time to hear what's going to happen with Buffy because I know they shot the pilot, but I haven't heard about them picking it up to series. But everybody felt it was going to happen. All the sites like Collider are screaming it. We're like, yeah, it's just negotiating the number of episodes per season, and if they'll get one or two seasons ordered at a time. And everybody thought it was going to be a thing because why wouldn't you want to like reinvest in a franchise that has a huge fan base already? But I guess on Friday they made the decision, but they didn't announce it because Sarah Michelle Gellar got on her Instagram right before she went on the South by Southwest carpet again on Saturday, the 14th, and it was like, this is what happened. And it turned out that one TV executive at Hulu who's high placed named Craig Erwich, and that's what they say is the one who's most likely, because he's kind of the head of Hulu's television division, decided that he did not like the show. But according to things that Zhao had, said on the Oscars red carpet last weekend, where she was sort of going through everything, even though they'd just been canceled, like she wasn't surprised this had happened. And Geller had said about 3 days later, after she announced on Saturday on like a People magazine article, because she's doing all this press already for Ready or Not too, this movie coming out. But basically that there had been one TV executive, which she didn't name at the time, but a lot of other places like Deadline figured it out pretty fast, that Craig Erwich had been very recalcitrant towards everything. He'd been on the set while they'd been filming things and going through the whole process with them, but he'd been clear that he was not a fan of the original Buffy. It, quote, wasn't for him, and that he'd never seen the entirety of the first run of the 7 seasons of the original series, and that it was very much, in Geller's words, an uphill battle day to day, and it felt like it was hard to make a show when it meant so much to the women involved between her, Zhao, and the Zuckerman sisters to be dealing with someone who just didn't take the legacy or the character seriously. So she's not one to talk a lot, even after everything with Joss being a complete creep broke in, I guess, 2019, 2020. Um, she what Ray Fisher said about the set of Justice League and between things Chris Carpenter had said about working especially on Angel. She was very supportive of her castmates, but she didn't really use that time or any of those outlets to like denounce Joss or get into a he said, she said fight over it. So she's always been pretty politic about things. And then even mentioning this that happened with the executive, she didn't name him, Deadline outed him. But it is just a lot of implication that because one guy who is very highly placed at Hulu just didn't like the show to begin with and just quote didn't feel it was for him, then he at the last minute had the chance to completely pull the plug on it and take it out of the hands of Geller and Zhao and the producers and everybody else and the fans who wanted it, and just because he just didn't feel like it. So that was horrible. Um,
Well, and the timing of it also is pretty sus because, as you said, they do have upfronts, so he could have waited for that to make their final announcements after talking about it a little bit more. And had they done that, then they would have realized they have a giant hole in their schedule that they could fill. But they decided to do it while Sarah Michelle Gellar was on the red carpet. Both of them were on the red carpet. She's promoting her movie. Chloe Zhao is going to the Oscars because she's been nominated, and then one of her people that she directed won. So he's announcing it over the weekend. when this is happening, right before they're about to announce the Firefly is going to get a potential continuation in animated form, it's really shady. It's not very professional. And I don't have a lot of respect for him because of the other things that he's canceled off the cuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad timing because it feels very punitive. Like, I know you're at your first red carpet for a film in 10 years. Let me make you embarrassed for Geller's sake. And then, oh, I know you're going to be anxious and nervous about if you win Best Director, you're in this, big press tour for the Oscars. Let me also make you feel nervous and upset to Zhao. It's like a deliberate timing. Like, he could have waited 3 more days till after the weekend when neither of those things were happening, and he didn't, which I feel is both, I don't know, a blessing and a curse because Zhao and Geller were both very honest on the carpet and on both really big press tours they had to places like People and all the different, like, especially Geller was on Today and Jimmy Fallon and all these places for the first time in a long time, and like talking about, hey, this really sucked. So I thought it was, weirdly enough, even though you're a petty, spiteful man, it showed me that you're also deeply stupid because you did it at a time where you could have waited for even 2 more weeks and they wouldn't have been in the public spotlight at this high a level, like it's freaking Oscars, but you did it to hurt them at their big publicity things, except you didn't think about the part where they could use the microphones to really talk this up and get a lot more eyeballs on it from not just Buffy fans on the online circuit. So
Yeah.
it also makes me disrespect him as not just a petty, spiteful person, but someone who's deeply stupid and doesn't actually understand how PR works, which is weird because he's the head of Hulu and Disney Television now. So that's very odd to me. I guess
It's
it's also,
fun how both the head of HBO and the head of Hulu Television are so incompetent at their jobs, and yet they still continue to get paid.
yeah, yeah. And I guess the timing is also because there's some internal reorganization within Disney. Bob Iger stepped down on Monday a week ago. And then I think it was that Erwich became more consolidated head of all of Disney Television with
Oh,
that movement. So I think it's also because
good
he
luck
had the
with that.
leverage to do it. But yeah, good luck with that. He had the leverage to do it, but it was felt timed in a way to really insult and humiliate Geller and Zhao. And then after, I mean, it became a lot of a timeline of who shot what. But so they get canceled on Friday. Geller talks about it on Instagram on Saturday. Sunday morning is the announcement that the Firefly cast is back on for an animated show, and that they're looking to get a home for it, but it's something they're developing on all the voice actors who are still alive or into it. Then by Tuesday, Geller's interview with People comes out saying one executive didn't like it. Within a few hours, both deadlines said, no, it's Craig Erwich, that's the one. And B, a leak of the script happened and was fed to different sources and places to download it online, except it was a leak of one of the early treatments of the pilot, the early drafts from like 2024. And for context, not only did they obviously update it before they shot the presentation pilot for Hulu, but after that, Hulu gave Zhao and Geller and the writing staff notes saying, hey, we need it to actually be 90 minutes and we need to have more Buffy in it and we need to make it feel a little bit edgier and older. Not like the leads would be recast, but just bring it a little bit more adult sensibilities. So they agreed to make a more 90-minute pilot with a new treatment and a new script, the one that would have Buffy in it more than like the last scene as like a teaser to get you into episode 2. So it
Yeah.
wasn't that Geller at all were resistant to doing more changes for the pilot based on what Hulu's first round of feedback were. They were definitely willing to try and change things up to what Hulu thought it wanted. But then after that, in the last 4 or 5 days, you've had articles planted in the Hollywood Reporter and especially Variety that have said a lot of very contradictory and honestly really hard to believe things, especially about Zhao as a director.
It's hard to give Variety any kind of credence after the whole thing with Colleen Ballinger of like supporting groomers, etc., and how they come down on sinners all of the time. As it seems like they'll print just kind of anything, but from the Variety, it's every time they have a headline, it's failed Buffy pilot. And failed why though? And they just want to put it on Zhao as like she apparently created this out of her nostrils and it was terrible. Instead of a bunch of people were on this and there was one person in particular who didn't like it. It wasn't that she is an incompetent director. They want to make that the story as, oh, Zhao couldn't handle it, of she was not directing right, she was under directing, or whatever. And that seems unlikely to me based off of the things that we've already heard about it. Do you not like the script or do you not like the directing?
Yeah.
What
I think
exactly is it about it? And why are you coming out with all these different things and using the first draft as your proof of what is wrong with it?
yeah, I think that's also part of it is it's really hard to believe. For context again, there are only three women who have ever won an Oscar for direction. Chloe Zhao for Nomadland, Jane Campion for The Piano, and Catherine Bigelow for, I think, Hurt Locker. So there's only three women in 99 years of the freaking Oscars who's won direction, and she's also been nominated a second time, although she didn't win for Hamnet, which has been a critical darling all year on the circuit. Jessie Buckley didn't just win Best Actress at the Oscars, she won it in a bunch of other places, including, I believe, the BAFTAs and SAG. So it's really hard to believe that this is a woman who Variety said like the Hulu didn't think she had vision when she directed and co-wrote one of the most critical darlings of the entire year, and the actress she directed won Best Actress at the Oscars. It's really hard to say that, and it does really smack of a lot of racism because it's not just saying the Zuckerman sisters don't know what they're doing or even Geller as a producer. It's saying this woman who's, Chinese descent is not enough vision for this. And kind of tying into the fact that Zhao took a lot of the heat for the Eternals not doing well when it came
Yeah.
out 5 or 6 years ago, when it was much more a factor of she was like one of 4 or 5 writers on it, and it was directed fine. It's actually very pretty to look at, but like it was Marvel trying to shoehorn yet another superhero team we didn't know about in 2 hours, which create a lot of continuity issues, to be honest, with the rest of the MCU. Because you're like, well, if they're such literally god tier beings, why didn't they stop any of the other stuff that's happened for the last decade? It just didn't make sense. But I do feel like Disney's kind of capitalizing on a lot of fanboys already have ill will towards Zhao for the Eternals and just kind of trying to lay it at her feet. But it's completely nonsensical because you don't get nominated for an Oscar twice and win it once because you're not good at your job. You just don't, especially as a woman, because that old adage about having to work twice as hard to be half as considered half as good is super true when you're a woman, especially a woman of color. So it just doesn't make sense.
I've seen people on threads this week saying that she killed the MCU. Like, personally, she did. Again, there were like five other people on that script. So, one, no, she didn't. Two, they buried Eternals. No one really knew when it released. And if they did, it should have been a limited series in another alternate universe or something. We also had Marvel fatigue, not superhero fatigue, because apparently Superman can do okay if you got an adequate script and emphasis behind it for the whole thing. It's not like they put Go Zhao in front of the entire division and allowed her to give the oof behind what the entire universe is doing the way that James Gunn has. He can do what he wants, write what he wants, direct what he wants, and he knows that it's going to be in continuity with everything else because he's part of that plan. But it's not the same thing to be the small person on the totem pole and then trying to create something through that. So they just want to blame her for anything that they put her on because they feel like they can. They didn't pick any of the other people that are on that list that was on the Eternals and say, ah, that person killed the MCU.
Yeah, it smacks of not just sexism, but a lot of racism at Zhao's way. And it's so ham-fisted by whoever at Disney like got Variety and PHR to say it, because at the same time, these things can't both be true. She can't be a decorated, twice Oscar-nominated director whose actress just won an Oscar for a movie she co-wrote and directed, and also be so lacking in vision she can't direct a TV pilot. Like they don't make sense. And some people are like, well, maybe what they meant, and this is people who are like just being sarcastic about it and frustrated as well, that when they say she didn't shoot enough coverage meant that she didn't get enough extra shots so that in post-production producers could mess around with it and make it, as they say, more capable to second screen viewing. And that's something that all this controversy and all these other things aside, we'll come back to because of the way a lot of the models of just making TV shows and movies at all is changing and not for better. But I think a lot of people, and I guess there was also a lot of talk that the script was bad. And again, I feel like it's unfair because we're both writers and we know that a first or second draft treatment is not the same as whatever got to the presentation pilot. And then the way TV shows work, the reason they shoot a presentation pilot for the networks is proof of concept. And a lot of times, what you see between the presentation pilot behind closed doors for executives and what actually even ends up as the first episode of a TV series on air are super different. And of all people, Buffy fans should know this because the
Yeah.
first presentation pilot Whedon shot um was like 30 or 45 minutes long or whatever, and Willow was in it, but it's a completely different actress. So like if you could imagine the show without Willow, which I cannot without Allison Hannigan's Willow, then
Yeah.
it's a completely different show. But I know that a lot of times in TV shows, the casting changes pretty substantially. Smallville had to reshoot part of its pilot because Annette O'Toole wasn't initially there, Martha. What could have been, but the original Charmed presentation pilot doesn't have Alyssa Milano as Phoebe, which I wish it happened because then maybe, Shannon Doherty would have eventually had to be pushed off the show by Milano, but that's a long ass story on a completely another topic. But that's not even the presentation pilot we're talking about. We're talking about the early drafts of the script from 2 years ago, over two
Yeah.
years ago. So to say like this is how it would have been, this is going to be stupid is really unfair and again smacks of Disney's ham-fistedness and trying to like sync this and control the narrative, which isn't really working, I think. And also, I read a couple of the script pages. I didn't read the full script as they were bandied about. And the first page sets up where you think someone who's a slayer named Stacy is going to take out a vampire, and it cuts, and it's basically like Sunnydale's kind of rebuilt itself from being a big crater, and they have a kind of they know what happened to their town, but kind of it becomes sort of mythologized. So now they have a vampire festival, which kind of makes sense because I could be like, how come people have collective amnesia about things? But A, Sunnydale was always good at that, and B, we live in a time post-COVID where we all just pretended that never happened. So it actually seems fair. But it's subverting this, oh, you expect it to be a slayer taking out a vampire, and it's really just a rehearsal for Vampire Day in Sunnydale, which is harkening back to the very first part of Welcome to the Hellmouth pilot, where you see Darla the vampire sneaking in with a boy and going, "It's scary. I hear noises." And he's like, "I don't hear anything." And she turns around, turns out to be the vampire and eats him. So it is that subversion of what you expect with a cold open. So it does track that. And then somewhere along there's an exchange where someone says in the pilot the victim was unalived, which people really were, oh, it reads like "Hello, fellow kids," and it sounds like trying to talk like teenagers when you're not a teenager, which I will say that in the pilot, Cordelia tells them that Jim got canceled because of the extreme dead guy in the locker, and she's like, he was way dead. And then Xander goes, "Oh, so not just a little bit dead then." So like exaggeration and changes about how you would present someone as dead harkens directly back to the pilot, and in that case, an exaggeration of Valley Girl speak sublimating into Buffy speak. But also, just as you had pointed out too, like sometimes
Yeah.
kids do say that. You
No,
trigger
not
kids who
just
are in that
kids.
age group.
Okay. So, like that, all of Gen Z, I have heard multiple students over several semesters teaching freshman college English use the term unalived in class unironically. It's part of the lingo now of like people will say essayed or graped. I've heard people say
Yeah,
graped
he's
out
great.
loud. That one bothers me more because you don't have to do, no one's gonna censor you here. You can say raped, but no, that's part of the lingo now, and you can like, oh, that's cringe. That's life. Okay, that's how kids talk sometimes. Not even just kids, because it filters into our vocabulary as well. The vocabulary changes, and it's a living, breathing thing. So, of all the things to pick out and say like, oh no, hello, fellow kids, that's the least of your problems because people actually say that.
Yeah, and like DV and SA, I say that sometimes more than I actually say
Mm.
domestic violence and sexual abuse because of you just get so used to hearing it in YouTube videos to trick the algorithm and the censors. And the final page, people got really mad at because that's the first time in the presentation pilot early script, which is not even like the pilot they eventually had to rewrite a 90-minute script for at network suggestions willingly. But in the original like second or third draft for the treatment of that pilot and the way it was shot, you don't see Buffy until the last page of the script. It's like page 59 out of 60. And she's apparently in that particular treatment of the script working at an insurance company and under the name Anne, which if you've seen any of the series, you know that's actually a pseudonym that has a
Yeah.
lot of bearing both on Buffy and even more so of all things on the spinoff Angel. But they're upset because like Buffy wouldn't work at an insurance company. What is she doing there? And why don't you see her until the very, very end? This can't be Buffy, except not noticing that the script also has it that, as Buffy's going into a meeting or whatever for the insurance company, like a bunch of alerts are going off about extra damage in Sunnydale. And oh, that makes sense. But if you're probably also working in part with the counselor, what's left of it, or like monitoring slayers and paranormal activity, that if you're working for an insurance company that has to deal with like random mysterious explosions or quote gas leaks, that they'll be the first people to know this kind of stuff. So you know where things are going off really quickly. But also just the idea that Buffy wouldn't just have a normal life. I'm like, did you watch the first 7 years of the show? That's all Buffy wanted. And she definitely wanted a job that wasn't a crappy slinging burgers job at some point in her life as
Yeah,
well.
be happy for her. This woman probably owns a house.
which is more than we do.
Only
So
one of us who does. I think that
yeah.
it's weird that they look at that closer as it's clearly a tease for the next episode. It's like they've never watched television before. And so the way that p shows are released these days, it is extremely likely that you would have not just the first episode, but the first episode and the second episode. So it would be like, okay, you have to watch through, and this is where they're trying to get you to do the binge behavior. Even if they're releasing week to week, often they'll have the first two episodes. But what they ended up doing is saying, no, let's just have a longer first episode and have more Buffy in it, which is the correction to your whining about she's not in it enough. Okay, we're just gonna have
And
a longer first episode.
everybody on the production side, Geller and Zhao and Zuckermans were willing to do that and rewrote a 90-minute pilot for that, for the specifications that Hulu said it wanted.
Yeah.
So that also makes it sus that you're like, well, we did this and we asked this and they did it. If they had said, no, we don't want to do it and been recalcitrant about it, but they were willing to give the new treatment of a script that Hulu said it wanted. So it's very frustrating. And I think part of this also moves me into Buffy just means a lot to a lot of people. I think it means a lot to millennial women and Gen X women, because Buffy's technically and Geller are like, I guess, more Gen X, but Buffy's, I guess, on the very, very cusp because she's technically born in January of 81 as a character, but is a lot of people in those age ranges who, again, we hadn't seen a lot of woman-led television, certainly not a lot of woman-led where the woman's the hero of the fantasy or the horror or anything like that. No offense to Final Girls like Heather Langenkamp and Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff, but we just hadn't seen it in like a television format where the woman gets to call the shots and that kind of stuff. And it was just very unique to the time.
Well,
But
and
I
it
think,
was serious. Like you think of Xena, which happened earlier, but it was really more comedy than drama,
mhm,
except for in certain parts where suddenly they're singing. So it's not like Joss even came up with the singing episode. But the Xena did come first, and it was wildly popular. It was so much more popular than actual Hercules. So there was always an audience for this, and then Buffy happened to like luck into that as they were a mid-season replacement, right?
yeah, they were shot in 1996, but they were held over and Dawson's Creek premiered first. And they were a mid-season replacement that didn't start till March of 1997. So they were only given like the 13 episodes. Here you're a mid-season replacement on a no-name network. There's this really famous story because they shot on the Fox lot. And Geller goes in to shoot, and it's around the same time that I think Kiefer Sutherland is shooting the first season of 24 for Fox. And he's like, "Oh, hey, nice to see you, blah blah blah. What are you shooting?" She's like, "Oh, I'm in Buffy the Vampire Slayer." He's like, "Wasn't my dad in that?" Because his father was Merrick in the original movie. And she's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, better luck next year. Good luck." Like saying that I get it, your show's not gonna be around and you'll have to go on pilots season next year. But it was just not expected to do anything because it's called Buffy the Vampire Slayer on the WB, which basically was a no-name network at that time. Like Dawson's had finally hit, but it had mostly just been kind of in its outlier network. That was, to be honest, far more urban and far more black skewing and had the Wayans brothers comedy show and the Jamie Foxx comedy show, like sitcoms. And there is a conversation that I'm not capable of having that I haven't thought about, but that is there about how the WB started as a network to really cater to black audiences. And once teen, very, very white dramas hit, it completely abandoned that model. But at the same time, when Buffy came out as a TV show, no one expected it to do anything. So, at all. And then it did. And I think it's because it resonated with a bunch of women who were at that time teenagers and young adults and 20 somethings who didn't feel seen, who didn't feel like there were stories for them. There certainly weren't movies for us. They were all in that mold of movies that weren't even superheroes because it hadn't really quite come in yet, but were more like action adventure, either, Arnold Schwarzenegger, True Lies type stuff, um, or disaster movies where like it's ID4 or like Twister and it's like dudes doing doodly things who have a woman sidekick or like a wife or
Yeah.
whatever, usually an ex-wife. But there wasn't anything for us. And then suddenly there was. And then because Buffy became a success in the demo that the WB wanted, which was teenagers, you got a lot of female fronted shows, and especially female fronted speculative shows. Roswell, Charmed came out of that. Eventually, even after Buffy left the network, you started getting things that were still very supernaturally centered, both Supernatural and Smallville, even though they focus around the men in those stories, Superman and the Winchester brothers, respectively. But like it really created both a niche for supernatural drama that were teen-ish focused, as well as, okay, we can do a drama where the woman is the focus. Because I mean, it doesn't missed me that shows like Felicity with Carrie Russell didn't come till after Buffy hit and was proven as like a proof of concept that a woman can lead the show.
Yeah.
So it was very important for us. And then especially because it, like because Dawson's Creek was the first gay storyline on TV, because the character of Jack was gay, it was the first gay kiss that was allowed on any network television. And in that case, there really were gay men behind the scenes making that happen. Both the showrunner of Dawson's Creek and the creator, Kim Williamson, is gay. And one of the head producers, Greg Berlanti, who brought so much queerness to the Arrowverse later on the CW, is also gay. So they were interested in telling a gay story. They just didn't tell the network it was going to develop it until Keir Smith, who was cast until much later. This was where Jack's character was going, so they could preserve that and sneak it in there. But similarly, Willow's journey as a lesbian became really the first visible, prominent, even though she's a secondary character, lesbian relationship on primetime television, especially primetime television aimed at teens. And it was the first, her and Tara's kiss was the first lesbian kiss that was allowed on television. Mostly because it was set up in a way that it couldn't really cut around it in the episode The Body, and it was like you either take this or you don't.
Yeah.
But like yeah, so that was extremely fundamental. However, it ended later with Evil Dead Lesbian Cliche and Tara's death, that it was the first place that lesbian viewers and queer women viewers could see themselves centered. And for the most part in seasons 4 and 5, what was a healthy relationship between two loving, nurturing, fairly stable women who were just, average, but they were doing all this together. It was nice. It was a nice thing to see,
Yeah. I
especially
mean,
to even be able
because
to.
it was, you didn't have other relationships to look at. It's where you're starving for these scraps of representation, and then you get these two, and they're so sweet, and you don't get enough from Tara ever, but like you do take what you can get with your grabby little hands. And I think that's why it became so intensely beloved. One, the actresses did a great job with it. They were really committed to it. And then secondly, because you didn't have other things, so people would attach and identify in a way that they hadn't been able to before. It's the thing where we always look at the UST and the ho yay and the les yay, where you're on the forums trying to look at this and say, well, I think Buffy and Faith could be a thing, but then they actually gave us a relationship. And so you're just like digging in with your fingers. And once that is broken, then there could be other ones. You can't have more until you have a first.
Yeah, and everybody hates how that was handled. Everybody hates how Tara died. It didn't work, and no one likes Kennedy, but I give the show credit for not being like, well, we did our lesbian plot line, now Willow will go back to being just bisexual, or we'll never talk about having lesbian characters again. For all their misrepresentation of Andrew in season 7 as a queer character, I get it, but like it still was the first. It was very deeply problematic. It had a lot of issues to it, especially once the death happened in season 6's end, that just drove people bonkers and broke a lot of people's hearts. But it was the first. It was the first place you saw two lesbians in primetime television, again, let alone television geared towards teenagers. And it was the first time you saw a lesbian kiss on TV, and it had to start somewhere. And so, honestly, just as a network, the fact that WB existed and catered to younger audience, and showrunners on both of those shows were like, no, we're doing queer storylines, and no, you can't cut these kisses or we'll walk, really pushed the medium and television forward. And so that was really a big thing. And I think that means that, in the intervening years, and because for all his faults, and I dislike him on so many levels, Whedon was always open to saying, bring your own subtext. And people were allowed to, in the fandom, bring subtext and queerness to relationships that were not explicitly canonically queer or just vaguely waved at queer, because Angel Spike is canon. It's just it's not officially made that way until an offhanded comment in the penultimate episode of Angel, but you'll pry that queerness of Spike and Angel and the Aurelians from My Cold Dead Hands. But it was just so formative. And I think that has lasted, that gays have embraced Sarah Michelle Gellar since then. They have the joke online where they call her mother as well.
Yeah.
You see it in some of the campy things she'll do, like sort of guest parts or like a smaller, almost cameo level role in something like Do Revenge on Netflix. And it's been that way. And the association of queerness with Buffy is intertwined because of how seminal Willow's storyline and growth was for the show and for people of that age group. And I don't know if we'd ever gotten a chance to see the new Scoobies and all of Nova, but I think they renamed her as well and as the New Slayers like group. But I assume in her posse there would have been at least one queer character, because it's such a fundamental part of Buffy as a show's DNA and television history that I can't imagine doing a Buffy show without another prominent queer character.
Yeah.
So that was something that I think a lot of us also felt like, not only we lose the rebirth and the extension of the life of a feminist icon, but we also missed out on a feminist icon written by women on their own terms. But we also missed out on more well handling of queerness. And that also brings me to the fact that because we've had so many media consolidations in the last 5 or 6 years, we've lost a lot of outlet for stories that aren't cishet white, mostly male focused.
Yeah.
And it's started the worst, or it started to be the biggest seismic shift because the WB Warner Brothers initially, God help us, merged with Discovery, which was terrible because it's like all these Tennessee crappy circus kind of shows mixed with Warner Brothers. It never made sense. And obviously it didn't because now they have to merge with Paramount because they lost so much money. And somehow Zaslav is going to get a $800 million retirement package, which I don't understand how you can sink a 100-year-old studio and make mostly $1 billion on it. But okay, life is shitty.
At least he'll
But
go away.
yeah, but I remember the spring of 2022 was basically what they called the CW Red Wedding, because basically they're phasing the CW out and like killing all their shows at once. And then because of the CW having fallen under such the auspices of Arrow doing well enough and then having the extended Arrowverse, Arrow is a pretty straight show. But the Arrowverse itself became very queer because again, Berlanti was running it. So the Legends of Tomorrow is very queer. Batwoman focuses on two different successive queer incarnations of Batwoman, who's a lesbian in the comics anyway. A lot of the other shows that came up, like Legacies, which is a spin-off of TVD and the originals, had a lot of queer relationships on that, especially a lot of gay characters in the final season. Like there was a lot going on in the CW that was much more ethnically and racially diverse and mindful of that finally in the 2010s, late or like early 2020s, and much more somewhat gender, but also like a sexuality diverse than it had been. It had been a continuing march from like the mid 90s to what we had now. And then when that died, a lot of that died. And a lot of Berlanti's ability, because he's one of the showrunners like Ryan Murphy, like, oh yeah, there were queer characters in like the 2015s, 2020, but most of them were under 3 or 4 showrunners when it was Berlanti. But then you see that consolidate, and then you've seen post pandemic, post writer strike, and with more mergers right now, we're looking at Paramount HBO, which seems to suck, but also Fox absorbing into Disney to begin with, less and less shows with black characters, less and less shows with queer characters, less and less shows even with women leading the shows, where it's become this landscape of reversion back even after 2020 to a lot of procedurals that are cop focused, a lot of shows, especially on Paramount. Half their thing is like Tyler Sheridan wrote a show about cowboys, cowboy focused, men who are salt of the earth, a lot of procedurals again, and like you're getting that shrunken space of it's very much feels like, not quite CBS and Touched by an Angel category, but CBS with NCIS, CSI, Alphabet Soup, or Cowboys. And the only other time I saw this much glorification of cowboys on television was in the 50s and 60s post World War II and trying to get everybody back to that homemaker Donna Reed thing after women had been working in the factories in the 40s. So like it's not lost on me that we're in that same kind of media contraction. In this case, some of it is because of this monopolistic everybody's eaten everybody else problem. And so now you don't have as many outlets. There are no small networks. There used to be Lifetime or Freeform, which was ABC Family before it, or the WB, or TBS made its own shows that were direct to TBS as a show. USA Network, and all of those are shrinking and contracting into the few streamers or linear TV networks we have left. And when that happens, they get scared and they play to the middle and they go, will this play to a middle-aged couple in Nebraska? And if it doesn't get made, and now we're at the point where they're even before the show gets to even air and be seen by eyes, it's yanked out for being. I think they said something about Hulu felt the pilot didn't play enough to general audiences, whatever the heck that means. But I read it as it was too feminist and probably had some aspects of it that could be building with the
Yeah.
side characters to be too queer, and we don't want
Things that are
that in
too
this age.
feminist, that are too queer. It's what was the name of the thing? Ilion issue of that they want to pull all the personal out of everything and make it so that it can play to everyone, in which case it plays to no one because people respond to personal, coherent stories rather than slop. But they're combined everything so much that you have these executives whose entire purpose is to make everything as bland and non-controversial as possible so that they're culling everything that could be interesting or really relate to people. As though men don't relate to Buffy. There are men who watch Buffy. There are men who Buffy was one of their favorite shows. And so it's not just for women, but they act like it's just for women and that if there is a queer person on the screen, they will literally melt and die.
And it's really frustrating. And it goes to like, I'm not saying it's a MAGA thing, but I am saying something in this feels extremely MAGA coded. It does feel like how CBS worked to fire Colbert to make Trump happy, or how for a while Disney did yank Kimmel and was going to do it till they had so much canceling backlash they couldn't sustain their subscriptions. It does feel like we're in an era where to prevail to the mostly conservative political regime and threats of suits and threats of we'll take your license from the FCC and all this stuff, whether they're paper tiger threats or not, that they're just not even trying. They're just going to make sure everything is as homogenous, as white, as cishet as possible, and as male focused as possible because that's what appeals to the powers that be. And it's like what Timothy Snyder said about on Tyranny, where like they're basically obeying in advance. And it's
Yeah.
and you were talking about Elio before, whatever that Disney movie was. They're like, well, we're not here to educate people or for people to have therapy sessions. So Elio cut out a gay storyline. But it just seems to me completely the wrong message to be able to make things really homogenous. Because I saw the stat, like, not that it's supposed to win Oscars every year, but Disney hasn't won an Oscar for animated film in 4 years. And in a year where a movie like K-pop Demon Hunters, which by the way, the writer and director said was very influenced by her love of old WB shows, and you can see it with like a
Yeah.
star-crossed demon
Yeah.
hunter and demon in the middle of it. It's very Bengal coded, but such a personal story because it's about her and her interest and her life. And I'm sure um part of the story also reflects her sort of growing up across cultures and things like that, and it became such a big hit and it touched so many audiences whether they were of Korean descent or not because it was so deeply personal. It was about something. So seeing Disney just try and homogenize to be as little about anything and take as little position about anything, it's failing the company. It's making a lot of their product, I mean, I know that Zootopia 2 was a huge hit, but like at the same time, it's making a lot of their movies and their TV shows indistinguishable from anything else, and it is really giving it that slop appeal where you're like, okay, here's the slop. It's bland. I don't get anything out of it, and an hour and a half later, it's just really generic. And then at the
It
same
needs to at
time,
least be entertaining. You've got to at least be entertaining. And if you can't be good, try that. But they aren't doing either because they're not willing to tell a real story. So you are boring people first before you are refusing to tell something that will actually relate to a lot of people. I think the concept with the K-pop Demon Hunters is so interesting because people can relate to that feeling of not belonging anywhere in so many different ways. Of when that first came out, people were talking about that of like that's what it feels like to be trans, that's what it feels like to be queer, to be a woman, to be biracial, and they connect with it because there are large universals that we can connect to emotionally, even if that person is not exactly the same kind of human as us. And that's what they're failing to understand because they're trying to edge out all the difference so that they can appeal to that middle. But in doing so, they're not giving stories that can even appeal to that middle.
yeah, if you, yeah, it becomes so diluted. I think there's also a third thing here besides monopolies, besides we have to play to just being content slop. And I mean content when I say it, not treating it as a story, not treating it as a
Yeah.
narrative, just treating it as something that fits an algorithm. It doesn't make too many people mad, which doesn't do anything. But there's also this problem of second screen viewing, which I had mentioned earlier. And, you've heard it in interviews from Mike Flanagan, you've heard it in interviews from Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. Jamila Jamil, she said something about it too in her podcast that now the executives are kind of the Netflixification of film and the Netflixification of TV shows, where the executives at the streamers will be, I don't know, this is too complicated. Did people restate the plot yet? People call each other by their character names enough. If someone's primarily browsing the internet to shop or using their phone to chill out, will they be able to follow this show so don't make it too complicated? And that's been notes that a lot of prominent creatives and actors and writers and directors have been getting from Netflix and other streamers for a while now about you've got to dumb this down, you've got to restate the plot points because it has to be something people can follow around while they're basically looking at their phone because the TV is the second screen. I feel like for the Planet THR and Variety Stories, some of the dig was that Chloe Zhao's vision was like not good or not realized, but also it's too difficult to follow. And it makes me wonder if some of that point was also we didn't think that she'd given us enough coverage to edit things in a way that we could restate the premise like 8 times in an episode, which again is not how original Buffy was shot. Yeah, they always have Giles explain something in the library for the prophecy of the week or whatever, or the bad demon species of the week. But television's got to the point now where it has to spoon feed you as if you have memory problems. And maybe part of that note was like the way Buffy pilot was written. I won't know and how it was shot in the presentation pilot. didn't necessarily handhold you enough for it to be the second screen that you were looking at, which just talks about a greater problem about how entertainment is made right now.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't trust TV audiences enough to pay the heck attention for 45 minutes,
Look,
I don't know what to tell you.
I miss things sometimes because I'm working when I'm watching TV, but there's this thing called rewind that I can still do, and I still have to listen to the commercials the second time I watch it. Or maybe the third time because I got busy again and then I missed the part that I was trying to rewatch. So you can rewatch things if you're like, wait, I missed something. You can go back. We're not incompetent. We know how to rewind. Is that they're trying to dumb it down too much. And maybe some people are dumb. Maybe media literacy is dead, but that's not necessarily getting you where you want to go.
Yeah, making it even dumber doesn't help people build up their skills. And it also drives off creatives. I think one of the reasons Flanagan left Netflix and went to Amazon Prime, I mean, part of it is his series got canceled, and I think he was very upset about the Midnight Club. But I think also part of it was like they gave him so many answers, like, we need more jump scares here. You need to explain that he looked for work on the island, so you need to shoot a montage. And I think real creatives aren't interested in being handhold for how to dumb down their vision for an audience where some of these things aren't just executives like getting extra worried because they think the average American is as dumb as a pile of bricks. And maybe they are, but the solution isn't basically to make Caillou for adults. Like, it's not the solution, is to be like, here's some bright, shiny colors, don't think. Like, it's not the point of it. And it's just fairly frustrating. And I think this, I don't know, it leads us to my final point that I wanted to talk about is like, what do you do when we've had this sea change both politically and in how everything's monopolized? They want to make as much money as possible by appealing to as many masses as possible. But now when you don't see stories that are going to be made that are going to reflect you, and I think this is part of us, I cried a lot this week because of it, because it's a long, and I know it sounds dumb, but Buffy's very important to me as a writer, as an academic, and as someone who's also now realized she's queer and being seen in those spaces. And it really hurt to lose something where in this complete shithole of a world where everything is on fire and everything is terrible, and now ICE is going to be stationed at airports because the government shutdown is so tight that they don't have enough TSA staff, which sounds like a disaster waiting to happen on a human rights violation scale. Like, you can't even have 5 minutes where, like, at least once a week I can look forward to something that I can watch communally with my spouse, and for 45 minutes I can not have the world be on fire. Like, you can't even get that. So what do you do when the whole world moves on and it's decided that for a while there was a complicated and not, perfectly perfect age, but you were still represented. People like you were still on TV. People like you were still allowed in movies. People like you were still reflected. And now it's become a place where they want to shove you back in the celluloid closet. And that's really
Yeah. I don't
hard to struggle
know. I
with.
was deeply depressed in my 20s because we were living under the Bush era, and it felt like, well, and I was living in Oklahoma when they first made their "We Hate Gay People" laws. And so it just felt like the entire country had abandoned you. And it feels like the same now of like it's not that we worked so hard and came so far. We worked so hard and then we got a few things and now they're stripping everything away. And so we've talked about this a couple of times this week of where we have the kind of regime where we don't have the bread or the circuses. They're trying to starve us to death by making everything impossibly expensive. There are no jobs and there's also no entertainment. So this is like the capital Hunger Games, but in the worst way possible. It's not even entertaining. So you I don't know. This is turning into the point where I'm just bitching about society. I don't know where we go from here. The best you can do is, first of all, go see Ready or Not 2 because Sarah Michelle Gellar's in it and it's amazing. So maybe the only thing that you can do on a media level is try to find things to support. There aren't going to be as many, and some of those are going to be more indie than you're used to because the spaces for it aren't on small networks. The spaces for it are indie writers, indie creators on YouTube. Some of them have gotten picked up by larger things, but that's where people can actually tell queer stories without it getting canceled because you can't do that anywhere else. We sat down last night and listed like what, 7 shows that we had tried to get into, but then they were all canceled. And then in one
Yeah.
case, for the Willow reboot, they took it off the platform. They
Yeah.
will just completely erase it. They took She-Ra off the platform. They are removing anything queer. So good luck. Um,
Yeah, and the loss of the Buffy reboot before it even got a chance to air, before I even got a chance to judge it for myself, felt like such a yank because we'd already been through this. We went through it with Dead Boy Detectives, we went through it with Shadow and Bone, we went through it with First Kill. We've gone through it in Willow. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've gone through it in such a way that not only does the show get canceled, but like at this point, you never even get to see it. Like the Buffy reboot, we'll never see. I hope maybe something changes, or the Willow show that they had and they yanked it in 6 months because it's tax write-off. So it's not even that it's there, you can go back to rewatch your DVDs. In some cases, they just yank the queer show out from under you, and then you can't even prove it existed through legal means, at least. And that's horrible. It just feels like you're adrift in a space where you're not only not allowed to be seen, but the traces of you that were there are being yanked out from under you to make it even less like it, people like you are being seen, and it's really horrible. And I guess this also loops me back to I don't know if because there's public outcry about it. I don't know if it's because people have been really mad about it. I don't know if it's because the production team, as far as Geller and Zhao, have been very public about talking about how disappointed they are. I don't know if it will make one damn difference to Disney, but I will say it's been a really interesting contrast of a week because at the same time, Disney has lost, people estimate, $80 million because of having to scrap an entire season of The Bachelorette. It was supposed to air tonight, I think, because they built it around the lead, the most famous persona on the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which is a reality show they built up with the same production team that makes The Kardashians. That was very popular for them. Started in fall of 2024, has had 4 seasons, air quotes, but they already cast Taylor Frankie about it and in it because she's a TikTok star and she got famous for Mom Talk and then for swinging with Mom Talk. But they already knew when the show aired in September 2024 that she had been involved in a domestic violence altercation with her baby daddy slash live-in partner at the time, and had gotten cops called on her and thrown a chair, and the chair had ricocheted and hit her daughter or scared her daughter. I think it said it actually hit her kid. And so there was already that going through trial. And so when both that trial was finished this year and she pled certain things down as a plea bargain, and when the spouse leaked some of the footage of the police visiting, etc., not the spouse, sorry, the baby daddy, because I don't think they ever
Yeah.
got married. She's just had a couple partners over the years. That became a backlash, and Disney realized it was too much for their brand to promote someone who you could see domestically abusing both her partner and throwing a chair to scare and hurt her daughter. And that wasn't their image. So they both had to pause filming on this 5th season of Mormon Wives, and they'll have to probably reshoot some of it or cut her out and add more footage in to supplement whatever episodes they have shot of her. And they had to scrap a whole Bachelor that season built around her because she got so famous when they already knew she was literally on trial for domestic abuse and it was all pending. Between giving back sponsorship stuff and having to trash a whole season of a reality show and stop and reshoot part of another one, they're lost at least 80 million or $100 million on banking Taylor Frankie. And it makes me really mad because it tells me Disney will platform reality show people who are guilty of domestic violence when they know they're guilty of domestic violence, but they won't platform a show that is a continuation of something that's a touchstone for, again, limited white feminism, but modern feminism in the last 30 years. And that they'll show women if they can show them exploitative and like titillating positions or reality shows, but they won't actually develop women characters and let us see them on the screen. And I cannot express to you the incandescent rage that leaves me. That's just really interesting in a week because we're still on Sunday, whereas the actress Zhao directed just won an Oscar for Best Actress. And there's been this backlash to canceling Buffy at all, tied with, well, Disney just lost 100 million, $80 million and giving that commercial sponsor money and being completely embarrassed for filming
Right.
this show that glorifies the domestic. It's all the same week for the same company. And it says a lot to me
They
about Craig Erwich's judgment.
It does because it's like they've given up an excuse to print money at this point. As we've also kind of been watching the reboot for Scrubs, and whether you wanted that or not, the actors are there, they're ready to go, they like each other, it's great. But then they also all do commercials, which means you get the commercial money too. And you get people watching the commercials, they don't tone away from it because the actors are there. So imagine the Buffy show, which you get merch and Hot Topic for, and you get people like tying comics and novels and whatever, and the boost of whatever sales you have for the Blu-rays and the additional IP issues. But then you also get the commercial money because Sarah Michelle Gellar can do the commercials and people, their eyes will be on it. So that's such a no-brainer that just work with the IP a little bit and you can go forward. But what they think they want to do, or at least what they've said they want to do, is that they want to hang on to that IP and then do something else. that's not going to get people on board with it,
Which
especially
shows
not
they
after
have,
you.
yeah, a fanatical misunderstanding because there is no show without Geller. There is a show without Whedon because he's one writer who eventually stepped away from the show in the final two seasons to work on other stuff. But there is
Yeah.
no show without Buffy. And the fact that they've shown this much disrespect and cruelty to Geller means that they come up with a different idea in 3 or 4 years, she'll be like, fuck it, and it'll never happen. So it
Yeah.
also just shows a complete misunderstanding of the property and why it resonates with people. But I think there's something here about such a contrast of, oh, we'll platform a domestic violence abuser so we can show housewives who are swinging and like having affairs on each other and their spouses, but we won't platform a feminist icon. And I think also, besides money, besides Craig Erwich being an idiot and having his own opinions and obviously being a misogynist and someone who doesn't like television that's diverse because he's also canceled Mid-Century Modern, which was a gay reboot of the
Yeah.
Golden Girls, which was adorable. He's also done things where he's canceled Dr. Odyssey, which had a throuple in it, which was queer. He canceled Station 19, even though it had solid ratings when it had one of its main relationships was a lesbian couple. Like, it says to me that Craig Erwich wants things as white, straight, and manly as possible, unless it's something Kardashians or Mormon housewives to be titillating for female audiences, but just reality slop. Like that's what he wants to do, which is super weird because it doesn't really pair with the Disney family brand or Disney is quality, but whatever, Hulu. Um, but it's a lot to me. And it does say a lot to me that in the last couple months, especially with how ICE assaulted Minneapolis and St. Paul, that a lot of the people who were on the ground, not all, I'm not taking that as a credit, but a lot of people who were on the ground and organizing and doing things with their signal groups and really being the backbone of being out there and being at like council meetings and governmental meetings and Target boycotts were
Yeah.
middle-aged women, women who were millennial women or Gen X women. And even people who were like, yeah, I just thought resistance libs were jokes. I thought they were stupid, but I got to say the women show up. So it's not lost on me that a feminist icon gets shelved at the same time where the current administration is having a lot of trouble dealing with middle-aged unmarried women and are literally talking about them as like a new terrorist threat or a new group that they need to silence. It's not lost on me that women who were raised on Buffy and on that level of heroism and self-sacrifice and courage in a way that you also see in Willow Rosenberg as a character, that at the same time they're being declared as people who you can't deal with by the administration, who are being like thorns in their side and activism, is the same time we're seeing Buffy shelved for stuff like Real Woman Housewives or whatever. So I don't necessarily have an ending for this. I just it's more like a we
Yeah.
come to
Where do we
to
go from here?
yeah, mourn burying
Where's the
Buffy, not to
silver
bury her.
lining?
There isn't one. The only thing I know is that as a writer, this has inspired me for the second book in my series when I get to it to make because the one of the books I'm working on, The Keening and Crescent City Paranormals, is surrounding an actress. So next time she'll have a minor antagonist or a sub-villain in the
Right.
next book who's basically a producer who's may or may not
Yeah.
be modeled on Craig Erwich, winky wink.
Her
Um,
producers and executive producers are always a problem. So, I mean, I guess you can like use it to drive you in fiction or at least embolden you of like if you're writing queer fiction and you're like, does anyone need to hear my version of it? Yes, we need all the queer stories all the time, every day. And if somebody doesn't want to read it, then they don't have to read it, but be bold and write your queer characters because we need them.
yeah, I think it's also it brings me to the fact that one of the most interesting things that I've seen in comments on social media in the last 8 days since this leaked has been a contingent of not all, to be fair, but a lot of white heterosexual guys who said they were fans of Buffy. Like, oh, did we really need Buffy anyway? And did we really need like a new retread of feminism anyway? And I think the fact that the Buffy show could be canceled by one asshole with an axe to grind against the show as a whole, and he never liked it to begin with in the 1990s, and was
Right?
able to
Too much
override
room
not
in the
just
90s.
all the queer fans and all the women fans, and then the four women at the center of it between the Zuckerman sisters, Zhao and Geller, as well as Gail Berman and Dolly Parton's producers. Like one asshole man with a terrible opinion was override all these other talented, gifted women who are in some cases legends in their field already. And that's if that doesn't say we need feminism, then I don't know what it does. Because at the metatextual level,
Absolutely.
yeah, we need Buffy because Buffy could
We
get
need
canceled by
fem
one dude.
Buffy, specifically feminism, but especially intersectional feminism, where
Yeah.
we get some women of color in there in the mix as well, and queer women, not just this one version of it, because we have so many needs as a society, and we need to feel like somebody's fighting for us because we're doing it every day.
So yeah, that is our eulogy for the Buffy reboot, and maybe something will change. Maybe they'll get shamed. Maybe the fact that they have 100 million plus hole in their schedule will make them rethink their idiocy. It's hard to say. Sometimes things just don't work out, but I can say that right now I'm at this place where I'm in a headspace of just watching reruns on literal DVDs of shows I already own that actually
Yeah.
have more than one season and 8 episodes and a cliffhanger
Well, I
because I
mean,
don't
we
trust
already
TV
canceled
right now.
Hulu, so
Yeah, and I also am in a place where I'm going to turn more to fiction where I know I can get things that are finished products and things that I can find that this one book was written by a queer indie author, but at least it was for me and for people who are like me, and I don't need to worry about TV, which has become content slot for your average middle-aged couple in Nebraska. No offense to them, but what they like isn't going to be what I want. So I'm just out of TV until it gets its head out of its ass, which may never be because they're all one monopoly now, and one day we'll have HBO, Paramount, Disney plus 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 or something. But I'm done with it. Like, you don't want to make TV that's for me, then fine. Just make it for boomers and like
yeah. I
incel
mean, a lot of us were
bros.
big readers before we watched a lot of TV. You can thank Xena and Buffy and all the genre shows for that. So we can go back to reading. That's fine. We can't read this book at the same time, but we can read them individually and then talk about them. It's not exactly the same. Maybe I'll get you into video games.
Yeah, but I guess my thought is like where we go from here, which again, if you know the Buffy musical is kind of a funny way to say it, but you just recommit to the stories you already love that they can't take away from you. You use what you loved from Buffy to create more characters and scenarios that you love for yourself as a fiction writer. And you read things that are also written by people who love that kind of genre and want to represent women and women intersectionally and queer people intersectionally. And you take it where you can find it and support each other because right now in the more modern mainstream, we're in a real bad desert where even Buffy can't fight it. And that really sucks. For now, this is Midnight Boss and Margaret Bates coming at you from the Other Lands Editing Podcast, and we'll see you again in a couple more weeks. So, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining the Otherlands Editing Podcast. Look for our next episode coming soon, and in the interim, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you want more information or want to connect, you can find Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss at our site, Otherlands Editing. Until next time, keep writing and keep refining your words.